everybody. Welcome to the Average Fan Podcast. My name is Sam Lattof. I am joined by Oliver Scholes, and you were probably wondering, the Average Fan, a podcast? What is this? We were very much motivated. We have to give credit to Thomas Pinzone and everybody who was on the Blazing Musket Roundtable. Had a very lively discussion, and we wanted to make a podcast for the average fan. And while recognizing there isn't a lot of Hartford podcasts, a lot of Hartford media, the Blazing Musket has, many podcasts going up and down the USL pyramid. We thought it's time. We're going to do it in-house. We have the most knowledgeable man when it comes to Hartford Athletic soccer and Oliver Scholes. So we're like, we'll just do this thing ourselves. So this is the Average Fan Podcast covering Hartford Athletic. We very much hope that you will enjoy this and follow along for the ride. It's always fun doing podcasts. I don't particularly usually host podcasts, usually come on as a guest. But I will be very blunt with you, whether I'm covering the Revs or covering Vermont Green. I don't necessarily have the time to, dig in on Hartford Athletic. What I get from Hartford Athletic is editing Oliver's articles. So he is the expert. He's going to let us know what is going on down in Hartford. But Oliver, first off, how does it feel to be on a Hartford Athletic podcast?
So the closest I've ever come to this before was, I think, in October, Thomas Pinzone had myself and Chris Belkey from the Bonanza, from the Hartford Athletic Supporters Group, on to talk about the USL Jägermeister Cup, or then Jägermeister Cup, now the Prinks Tires Cup, I guess, victory. And that was the first time I'd been on, and it was like dedicated. We're only talking Hartford Athletic. It's always been the round table, and we're talking about a bunch of different things, which is a ton of fun. I love talking about soccer. I love talking about United Soccer League. I love talking about soccer in New England. But it was fun to really focus on Hartford Athletic. So I'm excited to dig in a little bit more, particularly talk about the offseason a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. And this is, we'll see where this goes, I guess. So, yeah.
Exactly. We will see the ride that it takes us on. But Oliver, I'll steal from, my friend Mike Popovich. I'd love to get your just kind of origin story, just how you started following Hartford Athletic, what
Yeah.
got you into the club.
So, Hartford Athletic, there have been a number of kind of false starts at, second tier professional soccer in Hartford over the years. There was an effort that ended up with a bunch of people going to prison because they defrauded the city of a bunch of money. And then Hartford Sports Group came along to and their goal was to bring a USL championship club, to bring a club in this league to Hartford, playing at Dillon Stadium, which is a stadium that was originally constructed in the 1930s. It was a WPA project. It's been around forever. It's got a long history with like the Hartford Bicentennials played there, kind of an old NASL team. There had been professional American football played there. There have been concerts there. And kind of a dilapidated venue. And they got a bunch of money from the state and the city to renovate the venue, bring it up to kind of a more modern standard. And this all happened in 2018. And so I was, I think I was maybe scrolling on Instagram or I was on Facebook, and there was this thing that was like, put down your season ticket deposits for Hartford Athletic, professional soccer team in Hartford. And I was like, well, that's dope. Like, that's a heck of a lot cheaper than going to a Revs game. And it's like down the street from where I was working at the time. I was working in Hartford. And I was really excited. I put down my season ticket deposit. As soon as they were like, you couldn't get your season tickets. I was like, yeah, I'm in for this. I love live soccer. It's one of the like few sports that I really love to see live. I watch a lot on television, but it's just nothing for me that replicates the experience of being in the stadium, particularly when there's a bunch of people there who are excited about it as well. I just feel like it's a way better atmosphere than a lot of other live sports. And particularly at this level, I don't want to be too critical of MLS. There's a lot of really passionate fans. But I think lower division soccer has always been kind of like my personal thing. My boyhood club in England, Oldham Athletic, has been, despite being founding members of the Premier League, have played in the lower tiers ever since, right? They were relegated in the second year of the Premier League's existence and have played in the second, third, fourth, fifth tier. And so, like, I have this like love for lower division soccer in general. And so it was kind of like, oh, team in Hartford, it's lower division, it's all this stuff, it's really cool. And I got my season tickets, and I think I've missed like 3 home games in 7 years. I love it, and so I'm just always excited to be to be at the stadium, to talk to other people who care about soccer, who care about Hartford, who care about soccer in Hartford. It's just, I don't know, it's always a ton of fun.
Yeah, and maybe you can paint a picture of just what the soccer community is like in Hartford. You hear of obviously the rivals Rhode Island, up here in Massachusetts, not really outside of Lusitania do you really have, soccer heritage, if you will. And then obviously
Hmm.
now all throughout northern New England, you have clubs popping up. But just what's the soccer environment, soccer community, like in Hartford?
Well, the thing in Hartford specifically, and Connecticut more broadly, is there are so many people who love soccer, right? It's you look at the youth soccer scene, right, in Connecticut, the number of like academy clubs, and like I am not in that scene. I don't have kids. I didn't play like club soccer growing up, so I'm not like deeply embedded in that. But it's all over the place. There are hundreds, thousands of kids like within driving distance of Hartford playing, and there are so many people who are deeply, deeply passionate about soccer. And when Hartford Athletic played their first home game in 2019, that game was at Rentschler Field, where UConn football games were played because Dillon Stadium wasn't ready yet. There were like 12,000 people showed up to that game. Now, there's never been that number of people again, but I think it indicated that there are people who want to go see soccer, right? There are people who are really passionate about it. Hartford regularly is able to sell out, 5,500 seats when the weather's nice, in the summer and the fall, those kinds of things. It's harder other times of year. But there are people who care a lot and have been along for the ride, even through the really difficult years, 2023 in particular, where the numbers of fans really dropped off because the team was so poor. There's still people who've been there since the beginning. Right, they've been there for, I say I've missed a handful of home games. There's probably people who have missed any home games. There are some really dedicated, really passionate fans. And I think that comes from Connecticut being a state where there are lots of people who care a lot about soccer, like in a really general sense, right? It's not just like um, it's fertile ground, right? It's fertile ground for a soccer club, and that's why I think so many people had been so frustrated that there had been these false starts, right? With whether it was going to be NPSL or UPSL or whatever it was, it just never really came to fruition in a way that felt meaningful and felt like it was something people wanted to put their hard-earned dollars on the table for. At the same time, it's not this is not Vermont Green or Hearts of Pine, right? Like you look at these, like Hearts of Pine in particular, which has sold like 4,500 season tickets, which is just crazy. I like Hartford has maybe 1,000 season ticket holders, right, across all levels. So while there are a lot of people who are super passionate about soccer and love it, it doesn't have that fan base for this club that we've seen in some of the other places. The club Boise, I think, is another new club that has sold in League One, sold a ton of season tickets, and has a ton of interest. That's not been the case in Hartford, and we could maybe talk about some of the potential reasons for that later on. But despite it being a place where there is this fertile ground, and there are a lot of people who are deeply, deeply passionate about soccer and deeply passionate about this club, it hasn't hit that kind of fever pitch that we see with Portland or Boise or Vermont Green.
Yeah, to that point, thinking of the fertile ground, comes to mind, AC Connecticut recently building out this whole kind of brand new facility. And that's, for a club that isn't even professional at this point. Obviously, you got the attention of MLS with MLS Next Pro. We'll see how that goes, but at least got their attention at least. But, while Oliver kind of talked about his Hartford fandom, I would like to give the story on how the Blazing Musket found Oliver. So essentially, we were looking for a writer. A previous writer was no longer able to do it. So typically, what we've done is try and reach out to people. A lot of times, you have people reach out to us, but Hartford is an area you really have to do some digging. So I just went to the Reddit, and I think there was one person or maybe multiple people who are like, you have to like talk to this person, like. And then they talked about how you like were writer. I think, the former writer's like, yeah, he like writes like full recaps and like and analysis on the Reddit. And as soon as I saw it, like I just wanted to be like, hey, if you want to do this, like you have it. But I have to like pretend like there's some formal process and like I almost have to like not text back immediately. Like I'm
Right, right.
definitely
Don't look desperate. Don't look desperate. Right.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So, as soon as Oliver joined, it was clear Hartford Athletic coverage is going to the next level. So Oliver, kudos to you, just all the hard work that you do.
Thank you so much. And that was something like when I would shit post on Reddit about the club for years. I think I started doing the pandemic. I think 2020 was the first year I really started doing it when I was at home a lot, had a lot more time on my hands for things like that. Um, Occasionally people are like, oh, you should start a blog or you should get your own website or whatever. And I was like, I don't have time for that. Like I don't want to do that kind of stuff. Sam was like, we have all that stuff. You just have to like put the draft in this CMS instead of posting it on Reddit. And I was like, oh, that's easy, right? That's great. I can do that. So I was really excited to have that opportunity and not have to do all of that other work. So I'm really grateful that the Blazing Musket does all of that other work. So
No worries, no worries. I mean, I was talking with Matt Entrin, and he's like, "Yeah, you must have like no free time," and I'm like, I find some, but definitely a busy guy, definitely a busy guy. But enough talk about us, Oliver. Let's talk about the club that we're here to talk about, Hartford Athletic. Obviously, coming off interesting season, slow start, difficult paths, but obviously being able to lift silverware. Just overall, I guess, not looking fully back, but entering this season, just what's the energy like? What's the vibe like in terms of the Hartford Athletic and just what they can potentially do this year?
yeah, I think coming out of last season, the vibe was incredible. When I was on with Chris and Thomas after the USL Cup, we talked about the vibe at the stadium at the home game immediately following that, right? And it was probably the best like game day vibe this club has had since 2019, since that opening season when it was all fresh and everyone was excited and there was no sense of like, oh, this could be terrible for a long time. And there's a DJ in the parking lot and there's people handing out jello shots and they're doing an auction of like game worn jerseys and someone had brought like a pizza oven. So there's a guy making pizzas and like just giving them out to people like in the parking lot before the game, and the stadium is packed and they've got the cup there and people are taking pictures with it. And it was just this, and then of course they won the game, right? Like they then won that game. And so like the party continues and people are setting off fireworks, not in the stadium, but in the parking lot across the street, which I'm not sure they're supposed to do that either, but they do. And so the vibe was so good. And that I think is something that Hartford has not had since people were like, "Oh, it's so cool to have our own club." And some of that is like, yeah, you win a trophy and the vibe is incredible. It doesn't matter what the trophy is. Like any club where they're able to like have the parade, so to speak, and have this, the trophy at the stadium, the vibe is great. Even if it's, the Isthmian Sunday League in England or something like that. Like those guys love it, right? And their fans, whoever they are, love that too. But it was also, I think, kind of indicative of what it could be for this club if they're able to have sustained success, is that there are people who are just so excited they want to have something to celebrate. And some of that is about their love for soccer, certainly. Some of that is about the fact that, like, everyone makes fun of Connecticut for never letting go of the Whalers, but like that still looms over sports in Connecticut. Like the loss of the Whalers, the looming loss of the Connecticut Sun, um, you know, the Kraft family playing footsie with state over maybe bringing the Patriots here, right? That's what got Renfrew Field built in the first place. Kind of this feeling that like we want something that we can celebrate, and so I think the vibe was incredible. I think the off season for Hartford is always one of these times of you realize again that this is not a big spending club, right? We didn't go out and land a ton of marquee USL free agents, guys like Aaron Malloy or Cal Jennings or, laundry list of guys who went elsewhere. We're a couple of really big acquisitions. I don't want to downplay those, and we can get to those in a second. But again, there's that feeling in the offseason of like, are we really taking this to the next level? I think I'm maybe kind of like a little bit more of a glass half empty than a lot of fans. I think if you kind of polled Hartford fans in general, they'd be a little bit more glass half full on this offseason and the possibility for the club. So I want to be pretty transparent about that. And I'm just kind of pessimistic by nature when it comes to the clubs I support, just because they tend to be bad. And so, why get hurt too badly? But I think fans in general are pretty psyched. I think, when we talk about the average fan, right? Not the soccer sicko, right? Who's like, you know, uh, coming on podcasts and watches hundreds of hours of soccer coverage and, I think the average fan is pretty psyched about where things are right now.
Awesome, awesome. And I mean, you talked about it, just some of those off-season moves. Obviously, one for me, I was able to watch Hartford Athletic go up against the Revs in a preseason friendly. Augustine Williams was the only one to get a goal in that match for Hartford. But along with him, who else is coming into Hartford Athletic this season? And just overall, what are your thoughts on the moves?
Yeah, I mean, Augustine Williams, as you mentioned, that's the marquee signing in a lot of ways. He is the USL Championship second all-time leading goal scorer. He has, I think, 85 goals in his career. Only one player has been better than that. He's not a kind of a high volume guy, right? He's never had 20 goals in a season in his career. I think he's been over 15 goals just once. But he's consistent, and he shows up every season, and he logs 2,400, 2,600 minutes, and he'll score you 10, 12, 14 goals, something like that. That kind of consistent production is something that Hartford desperately, desperately needs. You look at over the years, Hartford has had, I think, three players score 10 goals in the season, and one of those was Mamadou Dieng, who's obviously did it twice and has moved on. That's not something that this club has been able to sustain. Is even a player getting to that level of 10 or 12 goals over the course of a season. And so bringing in Augustine Williams, who is this extremely consistent scorer, who does a lot of other things very well. His hold-up play is good. He's willing to, do the hard yards, chase the ball, and be part of that press that Brendan Burke values so much. That was the big signing, I think, was Augustine Williams. The other signings that have come in have been kind of a real overhaul of the midfield. So you had some guys leaving. Jack Peniotu obviously was on loan. He now is on loan with Loudoun, also in the championship. Marlon Hairston did not return for this season. And Hartford really needed something a little bit additional in midfield. So much of last season was the build-up play came down the wings. It came through Emmanuel Samadia and Sebastian Anderson, the kind of wing backs, in the system that Burke was playing. And the middle of the park could be a little bit of a black hole sometimes. And so they brought in three players. Probably the one that has, I think, maybe got people the most excited, because the thing that people tend to gravitate towards to his production is Barry Coffey, who was most recently, I think, MVP of the Irish second tier League of Ireland. Scored something like 26 goals from a midfield position there. And, this is kind of, I don't know, how is that going to translate to the USL Championship? Maybe really well, maybe not at all. I don't know, right? It's kind of a little bit of a, will he score 26 goals? Probably not. But he's clearly that is his role, is to come in and be that kind of, that to score goals, to be not so much a creative force, but a person who is going to be in and around the box, making that late run, scoring those goals. The second player, and I think the one who is probably the most likely to start right away, is Christos Hadjipaskalis, who's come from the Cypriot second tier. I think actually the first player born in Cyprus to play in the USL Championship. Don't quote me on that. I might be wrong. There's a couple of players who have dual nationality. Obviously, Jack Panayiotou is one of them. There's a couple of others, but I think he's the first Cyprus-born player to play in the league. It projects more as kind of a defensive midfielder, a number 6, has a little bit of production. Slots in, I think, into the starting 11 most naturally, from my perspective. And then the third midfielder is Andres Hernandez, who's most recently been playing in El Salvador. He's American born. He was born in Dallas, Texas, but has been playing most of his professional career in El Salvador, and has been part of, he's played some key minutes in when his club there, Alianza, has won silverware. So he's clearly a guy who can deliver in those moments. And that league, the Primera División, is probably the closest comparison to the USL Championship of those leagues, right? If you think about like League of Ireland second tier or the Cyprus second tier. So the transition for him is a little bit more natural. And he probably, again, slides in as kind of a 6-8, somewhere in there, defensive position. So there's this overhaul of the midfield with a clear intent to try and get it to be something it wasn't last season. You had Marlon Hairston, who put in a lot of really hard minutes, but was clearly by the end of the season couldn't go 90 minutes on a regular basis anymore. He just wasn't there, kind of at the tail end of his career. Jack Peniotu was obviously not coming back, and Hartford just didn't have a lot else going on. Beverly Makangila, who's returned, is a reliable player, but he's not a creative player. Junior Moreira, who played a lot of minutes when Hartford was playing well last season, is also not a particularly creative player, right? And Samuel Carriaga, who is back again, um, is again kind of a goal scorer, right? So you just kind of need to add to that group a little bit, and that's where the biggest overhaul I think has been in the middle of the park. There are a couple of other players who've come in, Sadat Inaku, who at one point was like the rising star of Ugandan soccer, been kind of derailed by injuries. We'll see. I admit I don't watch a lot of Ugandan first tier soccer. I mean, maybe I should. Maybe I'm not enough of a sicko that I'm not out there, scraping for footage. So I don't really know, right? He was very successful there. He had a not particularly successful spell with Dundee in the Scottish Premiership. Certainly was kind of a little bit derailed there by injuries. He had an Achilles injury. They had a lot of managerial changes. Hard to read into that too much. They brought in a reserve goalkeeper who, with Anthony Siaha on the pitch, is probably not going to see a ton of minutes. And they brought in Matt Rial, who's the other kind of championship experienced player who's joined the squad. Kind of a left wing back position. Who should be a good contributor. So there's the biggest change is really in midfield, right? And then it's what is Augie Williams going to provide at that number 9 position? And those are some big questions I think that this club is going to need to answer.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Augie Williams, obviously it is just a preseason game, but you can see that hold up play, kind of the ability to do that hard work to kind of, have that motor. So I think that will definitely be important. Obviously, when you're going up against the MLS side, it's going to be a lot of direct soccer route one. And obviously he kind of had to, struggle to get possession, but you saw him having a high work rate, working to try and make something happen. So it'll be interesting to see because obviously, like you mentioned already, going back to last season, you lost Mamadou Dieng. You mentioned the loss of Marlon Harrison in the midfield over the offseason. Is there any other losses, even if you want to kind of go back to Dieng for this team heading into the 2026 season?
Well, I mean, Dieng is a huge loss, right? Like now the flip side of that is if you're not like Real Madrid or Barcelona, you're a selling club, right? Like every club in the world is a selling club if the right club comes calling. So you have to live with that if a guy is good enough, someone's going to show interest. And so and Mamadou Dieng at 20, 21, having 25 goals in his Hartford career over 2 years was obviously someone was going to take an interest, right? So you had to be ready for that. And I think the club was. Brendan Burke and his coaching staff were prepared that was going to happen. It obviously, I think, hurt the club over the back half of the last season because he was really clicking with Michy and Galina. He was really clicking with the other players in that attack. And I think they could have really done something special if he'd still been with the club. Now, obviously, they did. They won the USL Cup after he was sold, right? He left after the quarterfinal. He played in the quarterfinal against San Antonio, and then he was sold. So they were able to go on and win that competition. But, you kind of look at how they stumbled into the postseason and then lost on penalties to Pittsburgh. And I think there was that feeling of like, if Mamadou had been here, this might have turned out a little bit different because it was really looking like it was on the verge of becoming very, very special. And part of the reason that was so important is that Michy Galina is a great player, but he's also been at his best when he's had that person to play off. If you look at the time he spent in Colorado Springs, when he and Haji Barry were like the most lethal attacking combination in the league, they both made each other better. And so Michy was at his best when he had that other player to kind of play off. And we were starting to see that develop with Mamadou Dieng. When Dieng was hot and he scored, I think, 5 goals in 3 games or something like that, Michy and Galina had like 2 goals and 4 assists, right? Alongside that, right? Like they were really coming together. So that's a big loss. Now, the guy who picked up a lot of the slack after Mamadou Dieng is Kyle Edwards, and he's also gone, right? Edwards scored a league record 8 goals as a substitute, right? And which, like, that's probably something you couldn't replicate this season. You couldn't assume he was going to do that again. But he was the guy who picked up the slack, and he's gone too. And so Hartford's all-time leading scorer, Mamadou Dieng, is gone. Their second all-time leading scorer, Kyle Edwards, is gone. Those are both really big losses for this club as you think about replacing that goal production, partly because, again, Augie Williams is probably not a 20-goal scorer, right? I mean, don't maybe good, maybe, but probably he's not going to produce at that level that it appeared Mamadou Dang was ready to leap to, right, within the USL Championship. The other big loss, I think, is the retirement of Joe Farrell. Um, Joe Farrell had a long career, very successful career, won a lot of silverware, won the Western Conference, he'd won the Players' Shield, I think he won the Eastern Conference too. He obviously won the USL Cup with Hartford. He had over 250 appearances in the league, which puts him in that kind of upper echelon of players in terms of making championship appearances. And it wasn't particularly surprising that he decided to retire on that kind of high note. But it is also a big loss because it does leave Hartford without a player who was one of the most reliable in terms of availability and in terms of minutes over the last couple of seasons, and was a really key contributor in the defense. Um, and Hartford hasn't really replaced him, right? They haven't brought in another center back, right? They have Arturo Diz, they have Jordan Scarlett, they have TJ Prestis, all of whom played very well last year, but that's all they have, right? And maybe Babakur and Jai can slide inside, maybe Matt Riala can slide inside a little bit, but they probably still need to add to that depth. So the loss of Joe Farrell and the fact they haven't really actively replaced him is another potential problem.
Yeah, and I guess kind of, looking ahead to the season, looking to, impact players. Who do you think is going to be the player? Again, these games don't all come down to one player, but their performance is going to define, how Hartford performs this season.
Wow, I think I think there's three players that people should kind of pay attention to. The first of those is Michelin Galina. This is a guy. He was Young Player of the Year in I think 2022. He looked like he was ready to break out. Whether he was going to go to MLS, he then I think moved to Turkey. He looked like he was just ready to go to some level that was way above where the USL Championship was, and it didn't work. Who knows why? Right? Sometimes it's just for no reason at all. And when he's been in Hartford, he's been good. He has I think 20 plus goal contributions over the last two seasons. It's not like he's been anonymous, but he's never really looked like that guy who in 2021, 2022, whenever he had the ball at his feet, you wanted to watch because you thought he was going to do something special, right? You just believed that he was going to do something so magical. And it hasn't really been there on a consistent basis in his time at Hartford. It's been there in fits and starts. And if he can get there, if he can develop the partnership with Augie Williams, or maybe it's with Sadat Anaku, or maybe it's with Adiwali Obalola, a returnee that we haven't really talked about, maybe he can develop that partnership with one of those players and be that guy. And if he's that guy, that's going to take Hartford to another level because that's a level of playmaking, a level of star power that Hartford has not really had, right, on a consistent basis. The second guy that I think people want to keep an eye on is Emmanuel Samadia, and the reason, two reasons. One, um, he might be the best player on the team. He's a left back, left wing back. He has a lot of national experience. With Sierra Leone, he's held up very, very well in AFCON competitions against guys like Mo Salah. He's looked like he belongs on the pitch with players like that. And obviously, Mo Salah's kind of at the tail end of his career. He's not at his peak anymore, but like if you can still look like you belong, that's a guy who like maybe he could be on a bottom tier Premier League team, right? Maybe he could be a kind of one of those teams like holding up. I don't think that's his future, right? I just don't think that's where he's going. I think he's most likely to go to MLS. But he's a guy who he defends incredibly well. He attacks incredibly well. He does all of those things that you need from a modern wingback, modern fullback. And he's at the age right now where he's at the peak, right? You think about when players at that kind of position peak, he's there right now, this season, next season. And I think he could be very special and be special enough that he finally gets that move, probably to MLS. Again, with the MLS calendar change, I imagine this is in the summer as what will technically be a preseason move for some MLS team, right? Bringing him in before the start of their 2026-2027 season. So people really need to kind of keep an eye on him as well because he is a very special player. And the third player is Anthony Siaha. He's not the best goalie in the league, right? Like like he's not Koke Vegas, he's not some of these other guys, but he is such a integral part of Hartford's mentality. He's such an integral part of Hartford's kind of emotional makeup that he might be more important than any of the other players on the pitch for what he brings to the team from that area. going into the Rhode Island game, the very first Rhode Island game last year, which ended up not being a particularly good game. It ended 0-0. That was the game where but he was the one after that game. He was shushing the fans. He was the one making the jerk off motions. And he had said prior to that game, I'm tired of this, right? I'm tired of their fans talking shit online. I'm tired of the club of RFC talking shit about Hartford. I want us to be better than them. I want to prove that they can't just talk shit like that. And I think that is something that, and I mean, and he proved it. He had a huge save in that game, right? He kept a clean sheet. He had a huge save. And I think that mentality and that emotional presence in the team is really, really critical. So if you're looking at three players who are really critical to Hartford's makeup this year, Mishin Galina, Emmanuel Samadia, and Anthony Siaha are the three that I would identify.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, when it comes to Siaha, I think, especially maybe people not in Hartford, that they look at the incidents in Rhode Island, and I think it maybe skews their vision of what he is. But he seems like a very talented goalkeeper. Seems like someone who's attracting the eyes of other clubs. So really excited to see how he performs. And I'll give a shout out too to TJ Priestos. Really impressed me with how he was able to play. Going up against some quality talent. So will be interesting to see
Yeah,
how he develops.
he was a player last season who was like a total surprise. He'd been playing at Yale. I don't know if he was like a training camp invitee or whatever the situation was, but you sign college guys and you don't necessarily expect a ton, right? At this point, the best players are not going to college in America, but he looks like he belongs in the championship. Like he had a couple of rough games early on, but he settled in, and I don't know that there's a certainly not a player in Hartford's recent history who feels like they've adapted so quickly to the game at this level. And absolutely, if he wants to keep playing in this league, he absolutely can have a very good career in the championship playing a center back. He absolutely belongs.
We'll say Oliver because I am an MLS sicko. Calendar change is happening 27, 28, and
Oh, it's
prior to
okay,
that, we're getting the Sprint season, which will
right.
probably not be sponsored by Sprint. It'll be sponsored by T-Mobile. So keep your calendars up for that. But
That's right. They're taking the break for the World Cup this summer. That's right.
that
I am not an MLS sicko, which I fully admit. So
lucky you. Um, but Oliver, you did mention some other competitions that Hartford will be in. Obviously we have the U.S. Open Cup coming up, and then there's also the USL Cup. I'm only going to refer to it as the USL Cup because I apparently can't call it the Jägermeister Cup anymore, and that's the only thing I want to call it. So we'll just stick with the League Cup. But just overall, I would say, what is your outlook on these tournaments? For Hartford, again, coming off, winning the whole thing
yeah,
last year, you know, is there the potential to go deep in, either of these tournaments?
yeah. Well, let's talk about the what's now I guess the Prinks Tires Cup, which is way less cool than the Jägermeister Cup. Yeah. I will say if you're going to get a sponsor for your League Cup, you should be required to get something cool. Yeah. So uh, let's talk about that one first because the way Hartford approached the USL Cup last season was this is the easiest way to win silverware. You get out of your group, and then you have to win exactly 3 games to lift silverware. That's not the case in any other competition, right? That these clubs are playing in, right? And I think Hartford is going to approach it very similarly, right? You get out of your group, which is going to be a little bit more challenging this year because I think only the group winners are going through. There isn't going to be as much. There's more clubs participating because of the expansion of League One, particularly. So it might be a little bit more challenging. But once you get out of your group, you still are only going to you have that very short trajectory to get to silverware. And I think Brendan Burke, he was with Houston Dynamo when they won U.S. Open Cup a couple of years ago, 2023, I think that was. He values those competitions. He thinks they're important. Uh, you won't see like the B team from Hartford in the USL Cup in particular. You'll see them playing those games to win. Now it's a cup competition, right? Like you can play out of your mind and lose to a own goal or something like that, right? So I don't want to say there's like any guarantees, there aren't in soccer, but that's a competition that I fully expect that Brendan Burke and Hartford Athletic will be targeting, especially because they know they're going to be getting everybody's best shot, right? When you come in as the defending champions, everybody circles that game on the calendar and says, we want to prove that we could win this competition by beating the last guys to win this competition. We're gonna give it everything we've got. So I think they'll go for it for sure. And Burke's style, if the club is clicking, they were the best team on the pitch in those 3 knockout USL Cup games last year. So that style of play is pretty amenable to the teams they're going to be facing. US Open Cup, I have lower expectations for. Obviously, they're opening it up with a visit to FC Motown down in New Jersey. That's an amateur side, a USL's 2 side that they will probably win that game very easily. But then they're probably going to get Hearts of Pine or RAFC or Westchester or someone in the next round. And I got to be honest, I just, the way Hartford's last couple of seasons have gone in terms of getting a little bit of a slow start, I would not anticipate Hartford to make a deep run in the US Open Cup. Now, I know they want to, they're not writing it off, but we look at how slowly they started last season, how long it took them to really get everybody locked in. And based on kind of what we've seen from a couple of their preseason games, it feels like we're right back there again, right? We're not locked in, even allowing for the fact that it was the Revs, or in their previous preseason game, it was, Red Bull, I think, where they lost pretty badly as well. Even allowing for the level of competition, they're not locked in. And if they're not locked in to start the season, it's going to be difficult to go far in the US Open Cup because the games happen right away. The USL Cup, it's a little later. You've got a little bit more runway to get things really pulled together, and you don't have that. So I can very much see them having to go to Tidewater, or having to go up to Fitzy, or one of those clubs coming here to Hartford, and it just doesn't go their way. I, but again, like, it's soccer, right? They could play badly, and it turns out that Barry Coffey can score goals from anywhere on the pitch and they win, right? Like, you just don't know. But I would if I were a betting man, which I am not, I would bet on the USL Cup as a more likely deep run than the US Open Cup.
Got you. And I mean, you just mentioned coffee. I just have to say, if any nearby bar, if any supporters, got to get an Irish coffee drink in there. But also, too, you do mention anything can happen in soccer. Vermont Green is going up against Portland Hearts of Pine. Maybe they do get the win. But if Portland does end up winning that matchup and, somehow, faces Hartford Athletic, do you feel that there will be a little edge, a little wanting to right
Oh,
the wrongs of the last Open Cup game?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you saw that even a little bit when Portland came down for USL Cup game after that. It was like a month later. Um, I think it might have been Mishin Galina who said, like, it's not, yeah, we're never going to get that one back. They beat us, but we want to prove, like, we want to beat them now. We really want to get out there. And then it was 2-0, it was 2 Jack Penio, 2 goals. Very comfortable victory for Hartford in that game. But I do think if that is the case, if it were Portland for Hartford in the second round of the US Open Cup, there would be a little bit of something extra for both teams. I think Portland would absolutely be looking at it. We got them last year, guys. We can beat them again. And absolutely, Brendan Burke would have his guys fired up for, they're not going to do this to us twice. So that could be, if that ended up being a second round game, as much as Vermont Green versus Portland is going to be an incredible atmosphere, Portland versus Hartford at either stadium, particularly if it was in Hartford and with Portland's traveling support, could also be an incredible atmosphere.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of the team kind of having the struggle of, maybe not being locked in to start the season. Do you think that's something that falls on Brendan Burke? Is it something where he has to kind of find a way to, get the guys, locked in to start the season? Does it fall on the players? And we'd love to just kind of hear your thoughts on
Yeah.
Brendan Burke entering the season, obviously coming off a trophy winning season. Is there anything you're looking to see him maybe improve on, or just kind of continue to grow in as his tenure in Hartford continues?
Yeah, I think, and I've alluded to this a couple of times on the roundtable, but maybe now's the time to kind of dig in a little bit more. Brendan Burke has has some really strong ideas about, like, how the game of soccer should be played, and you can see those expressed on the pitch, and you can hear them expressed when he talks to the media. Right? He believes in pressing the life out of your opponent and turning the ball over in the most awkward area of the pitch you can, and then progressing the ball into the box as quickly as possible and getting a shot away. He's not talking about, oh, we're going to break them down with a million passes. We're not going to sit back and soak them up and then try to get them on the counter. We want to make their lives hell when they have the ball and move so quickly when we have the ball that they don't have time to recover. And that's a very high risk style, right? If you don't hit your press triggers when you're defending and you miss and the ball gets out, then you can be really exposed at the back because you have a lot of guys pushed very high up the pitch. If you get the ball and you make that outlet pass and the guy didn't make the run, you just kick the ball into touch and people are like, what are you doing? Or you got a guy off sides because nobody made the pass right away. And so part of, I think, what Hartford struggled with last season early on, and part of, I think, why they struggle against the teams like the Revs or Red Bull is that you can't play a high risk style at anything less than perfection in those games. And in the preseason, of course, you're not perfect because so many of these guys are new, right? You talk about Coffey, Haji Pascalis, Anaku, all these guys who might be in the starting 11. They weren't here last season. They've not played. They don't have minutes, and they're intelligent soccer players. They know what it means to get their press triggers right. But like you still have to do it right in the context of the system. So I think what I actually was a little discouraged by in the offseason was that it felt like Hartford had to retool quite so much, right? Because when you talk about bringing in like 4 new players into your starting 11, and you're talking about playing a style of football that requires everyone to be so much on the same page and not missing those triggers and knowing when a guy's going to run or where he's going to run to, yeah, there's going to be some teething problems every season if you're not bringing back 10 guys, right? So I don't know that Burke needs to do anything different. I do think that maybe looking ahead, you want to be turning the roster over less. And that's something that kind of goes beyond Brendan Burke and is about what the club is willing to invest in retaining players and keeping them around. But I do think Burke's approach to the game kind of results in some of these early season struggles. We saw it in 2024 as well. Like Hartford got a couple of halfway decent results, and then they went on like a 6-game losing streak, and they got like clobbered. It was like 5-0. They lost to Louisville or something like that, and 4-1 to Indy 11. And they had to recover over the course of that season. And when things got better, they won some games, and they went into the end of the season with a chance to make the playoffs. And again, I just feel like that's kind of where we're headed again, because the style of play does not allow a lot of wiggle room for guys not being quite on the same page.
Yeah, and definitely some great insight there into Burke. And as we kind of wrap up, I do want to mention, obviously Hartford Athletic, not only on the men's side, they now have a USLW side. We will try and cover them as best as we can. I know at least definitely a written form over at the Blazing Musket, we will as well. But would love to just kind of get your thoughts on, a women's side, coming to Hartford and just overall being able to provide these opportunities for kind of local players in the soccer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the W League side has been a long time coming. When the W League launched, Hartford was one of the 6 teams they announced was going to be participating, and then they didn't field a side. And that was really disappointing to a lot of people who are supporters of the club. There are a lot of people among the Hartford Athletic supporter base who are really passionate fans of women's soccer, of U.S. women's team, who played soccer, women who played soccer, men who enjoy women's soccer. I mean, I personally love watching women's soccer as well. There were a lot of people who were really excited by that when it was announced and really disappointed that it didn't come to fruition. And so now that it has, I think there is a lot of enthusiasm to see Hartford. It's an amateur league. It's not, we're not talking Super League or anything like that, but it's a women's team. And I think it's really awesome. And I'm really looking forward to being able to go to those games as well. I think they're mostly weeknight games, which is awesome because I can just walk down to the stadium after work, which is really convenient, and I love doing that. I know there are a lot of people who are really excited by that, and they've really made the effort to sign a lot of women who played high school soccer in Connecticut, have played college soccer in Connecticut at UConn, for example. They've signed, I think, at least one player who is a product of Hartford Athletics Academy, who's been in their kind of U15, U16, U17 women's sides. So they've really invested in local talent, which is the case, right? If you've got a W League team or USL2 League team on the men's side, that's often what it looks like. Vermont Green, right? Kind of a classic example of that. And maybe recruit a few kind of outside players to kind of fill out the roster. So they've really leaned heavily into that. And it's an amateur women's league. I don't want to say that that's easy. It's all soccer. It's hard, but like this is an opportunity for them to make an impact in this league, right? They don't have to come out with $1 million budget to compete, right? You just have to do good recruiting. There are a lot of women playing soccer in Connecticut, whether it's at the club level, high school, college, like looking for those opportunities. The manager, former player, club legend Danny Barrera talked about like women who might be looking to take that next step. They've graduated from college. They're hoping to launch a professional career for themselves, but the opportunities haven't been there. This is an opportunity to showcase themselves. So it gives an opportunity, right? And a really great one. And they've gone about it in a way that makes a lot of sense in terms of constructing the roster. They really probably need to sign like more than one defender. I think when I last looked, they had like 8 midfielders and 2 forwards. And so, I mean, there's a long way to go, right? The season doesn't kick off till May. But I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's really exciting. It's another handful, 5 or 6 games at the stadium. They've done a great job of marketing that to season ticket holders. I think they offered it up for $50 to add those games to your season ticket plan, which I think is an incredible deal. The games are the away games are pretty close by. I think Vermont is the furthest they have to travel, so there's a lot of great opportunities if you want to go to playing is New England Mutiny, I think it is. It's going to be playing up the road at Lusitano, or AC Connecticut, I think is the other one of the other teams that's close by. So I don't know, there's a lot of really great opportunities, and I think the women's league, to the extent that we're able to cover it, is really awesome and a really great development for the club.
Yeah, I mean, you think about summer nights, just being able to watch, some good soccer, and, the season kind of really comes thick and fast, so you can kind of, get really invested into it. So definitely, make sure to check that out. And I mean, Oliver, I want to wrap up. Final question here. Does Connecticut United field a team?
This season?
Yes.
Yes, because I heard a rumor that they actually have somewhere they're going to play soccer.
Oh,
Uh, So I'm not doing spoilers. I'm not doing rumors, but I've heard that they actually have somewhere that they're going to play. So I think here's what I will say though is I would actually be somewhat surprised if they play in 2027. I think this might be a one and done. And the backstory here for people who aren't following Connecticut United is they launched with this idea that they were going to build a stadium as part of a larger development in Bridgeport. They identified a location, they were going to build it. They asked the state for money to build a stadium, and the state has basically said, "Well, we'll give you some money to help clean up the site," which there's concerns about needing to remove toxic soil and those things, but we're not going to put any money into building the stadium. And at this point, it seems that Connecticut United is not going to proceed with trying to build a stadium on that location in Bridgeport. And so if they are able to secure somewhere to play for this season, whether it's, at one of the universities, Fairfield or University of New Haven or something like that, that's going to get really challenging in year 2 because that's not free, right? And one of the things we've seen undo so many clubs at any level is paying somebody else for the right to play somewhere is really expensive. And they could at any moment say, you know what, actually, we're just not interested. Sorry, we don't want you back for whatever reason, right? So I think if they're not able to identify a permanent home very soon, they're not going to be around. And so this might be the only year. Now, I love having more soccer around. I really wish they'd try and make a run at League One, find a permanent home, move to the USL, not chase some crazy MLS to Bridgeport, Connecticut dream, which just feels like it's never going to happen, and put together something, because there could be another professional club at that level, right? There could be a League One club in Connecticut. This is not, it's almost a totally different market. So I think they played this season. I think they play all their games. I would absolutely not bet any money on them playing in 2027.
That is very interesting and a good point that you make. But Oliver, really do appreciate it. Got to get ready for the season. I mean, I was actually just looking at it. Season's kind of approaching here, coming up in 2 weeks against Sporting Jack's new USL club. But for everyone listening, really do appreciate it. Like I said, season opener coming out in 2 weeks. So maybe we will come back the week of that game. But make sure if you're enjoying this, let us know. Also, make sure wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure to follow us, like, subscribe, all of that. Make sure to follow Oliver's work on the Blazing Musket in written form. We'll also post some YouTube videos and kind of social content. But overall, just let us know, if you appreciate, having a podcast, covering you, and just overall, we just hope to be a valuable resource to you. But just want to give a quick shout out to all the average fans, and thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Sam.